Good afternoon. This is Dr. David back with another insightful, enlightening episode of Fresh Start with Dr. David. Hope that you've been well for the past few weeks. In some ways I have, in other ways I haven't, specifically as it refers to or pertains to my allergies. I don't know about you guys, but my allergies have been killing me lately. My eyes, skin, everything. It's just been miserable. And according to what I've read in the news and other places, it's probably not going to get any better. Allergy seasons keep getting worse and worse. And as you can see with our weather, at least here in the greater Atlanta area, where one day it's 50 degrees and the next day it's 80 and the next day it's rainy, the next day it's windy. I mean, you really don't know what to expect right now. It's just the craziest thing I've ever seen. But I think it's just a sign of the times. I would like to share a couple of things with you just about allergies. And as I've said before, I'm not your physician. I'm not giving advice or medical advice or medical recommendations or anything. I'm just kind of sharing this just from my own perspective as somebody who does everything he can to manage severe seasonal allergies that I've had lifelong. Um, and I have some guesses about why I have them. But, you know, I've had to do a lot of things to manage my allergies. And even at one point in my life, my allergies were so bad that it was almost disabling. But anyway, let me just share a couple things with you. Number one, go to an allergist, a specialist, right? At least your primary care physician, right? At least a family medicine doctor or an internal medicine doctor. But go to an allergy specialist if you have really, really bad allergies. And I mean allergies so bad that you're wiping and scratching your eyes or your skin all the time, or you've got eczema, things like that. Don't just try to manage it on your own. And here's the reason why, because believe it or not, over the counter products can be dangerous. They really can, especially if you misuse them. And that definitely includes drugs that are antihistamines. And I could go down the list of them, but the most obvious suspect would be Benadryl. So just be careful about you and your kids, your children, and how you use those drugs, because those drugs have cholinergic side effects. And those cholinergic side effects affect your entire body, your bowels, your ability to secrete things from glands, your digestion, the dryness of your skin, your mucosal surfaces, your mucosal tissues, the hydration in your body, all those things. So be really careful about using over-the-counter antihistamines. Just because it's over-the-counter doesn't mean that it can't be really, really strong. And it can cause a lot of those antihistamines, especially the stronger, older ones like Benadryl, etc. They can cause a bunch of side effects. So be really, really, really careful. And if you want to chat about your allergies and some things that you can do kind of from a lifestyle perspective to combat them without needing, strong medications and things like that, feel free to schedule an appointment at my office and we can chat about it. And I can share some of the things that I do to keep mine. Another one that's big is hydration, especially if so I use allergy medications intermittently. And I'll share with you some of the ones I use. I use Zysol, which is one of the best ones. I use Zyrtec, and Zysol, by the way, is the isomer of Zyrtec. So Zysol and Zyrtec are similar, or the same drug basically. They're just the way that they rotate and stuff like that is slightly different. I'm not going to go into all the biomechanics of it, but anyway, they're very similar. It's almost identical molecules almost. And then I also use Allegra, which for me has a lot fewer side effects than other drugs. And then I use Claritin. But here's the thing: I rotate between different ones to avoid receptor downregulation, which leads to basically your body getting used to it and the drug no longer being effective. And I try to stay really, really hydrated. So try to have a hydration goal. One of the best ways to deal with allergies is keeping your body hydrated. And so that's something you can do. And of course, there are other things that you do, at least things that I do on a regular basis, like eye drops and things. I don't know what I would do without eye drops. They make such a huge difference. But anyway, since this is pollen season, it's almost it's spring, depending on your definition of when spring begins, those kind of things. As far as I'm concerned, it's spring. As far as I'm concerned, spring started about 6 weeks ago when began to first have allergy symptoms, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, be careful about over-the-counter agents because they can do a lot of irreparable damage and you won't find out till later on. So just because it's over the counter and it doesn't require prescription doesn't mean that it can't be harmful, you know? And a classic example is people who take BC powder and strong NSAIDs for muscle aches and pains. The next thing you know, they end up with ulcers. So, be careful about treating yourself, especially with over-the-counter things, because there are a lot of things that you may not be aware of. Even if they're on the label, you may not understand the full repercussions. So just be careful. Anyway, with that, I hope your allergies improve. I try to manage mine, and they actually are a little bit better. It usually takes me a couple of months, even with eye drops and intermittent allergy medications and hydration and all those kind of things to kind of for the worser allergy symptoms to subside. But anyway, you will get past this. That brings me to today's episode. So I just talked about how kind of you can break the cycle of your allergies being so bad that it disrupts your life. And that is a real thing. Everybody's not the same. Everybody's body is different. My immune system is different from yours and vice versa. And just because something might not be that bad for you doesn't mean it can't be chronically disabling for somebody else. So just remember that everybody's unique, and just because something doesn't affect you that bad doesn't mean that it doesn't affect other people. An example I can think of that is it seems like a lot of people these days have chronic headaches, migraine headaches, et cetera, et cetera. And I think I think there's a genetic component to it, but also think it has to do with what you're eating, your eating habits, what you're consuming, what you're drinking, things like that. Caffeine, I could go down the list, dyes, et cetera, et cetera. So just be aware. If you're having chronic headaches, that's another situation that you want to address professionally by going and see a physician, maybe a neurologist if you have really, really bad headaches, or migraine headaches, certainly. But migraine headaches are a warning from the brain that something's wrong. Just like when your eyes itch or your skin itch or you have eczema and things like that, that's a warning from your skin that something's wrong. So be sure to try to get those things addressed and don't try to self-doctor yourself. Go to somebody who can really help you, who's trained to do that. But like I was saying, that brings us to the concept or the topic for today, which is stuck states. Some of the things that I shared with you just a second ago are about getting out of a stuck state. I consider chronic headaches to be a stuck state, chronic allergies or a stuck state, things like that. Most people have some kind of sense of what a stuck state is, or at least you understand what it means to be stuck, right? That just means you're not moving. And if you live in the greater Atlanta area like I do and commute 3 to 4 hours a day, you definitely understand that concept from traffic. But if you're stuck in traffic, there's not a lot of things that you can do. Obviously, you can kind of try to go around the worst times for traffic by arranging your schedule so that you're not traveling. But that's becoming harder and harder to do. And I've tested that. And even if I leave at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the afternoon and, decide to work from home to finish up stuff, I'm still stuck in traffic. So it doesn't seem to matter what time I leave in the morning or what time I leave in the evening. It's still going to be around the same window of time between an hour and 2 hours to get home. So here's some things, though, I want you to think about. Even though you can't do a lot of things about being stuck in traffic, there are some things that you can do about feeling and being stuck in life. And a stuck state, if you break it down, it's just a pattern. It's a cycle where the same things seem to perpetuate over and over in a specific order, or sometimes even in a non-specific order, but in a pattern or a cycle that it's tough to break. And a lot of times when people are stuck or in a stuck state, they don't even recognize that they're in a stuck state. They don't see the pattern because they're too close to it. They aren't objective. It's subjective because they're too close to it. So number one is, it may take someone else to help you realize why you're stuck and how deep you're stuck, right? So keep that in mind. But one of the first things that you have to do is observe, right? You have to be aware that there's a pattern going on, whatever that pattern is, that's hindering you from being happy or growing or being successful or things like that, right? So you have to be aware of it. You have to recognize it. And then you have to actually, and that's what I do a lot of times with my clients who are stuck in my office, is we analyze the pattern. We reproduce the pattern that's happening in their life, and so they can see every step of it and recognize it. If you're in a pattern, let's say there's 10 steps to the pattern you're in, revolving, not being happy or being depressed or procrastination or whatever it is, you've got to know every single step. If you don't know that step, then you're going to miss it and the pattern's going to repeat again. So, number one, you have to recognize the pattern. Number two, you have to identify each specific step within that pattern. Then you can begin to understand the pattern. Once you understand the pattern, then you have to make a decision that you're willing to or open to or capable of interrupting some part of that pattern, right? And a great kind of example of that is how drugs work. If you look at drugs, whether it's antibiotics or antivirals or antifungals or whatever, they usually, generally speaking, they interrupt some part of the cell cycle, right? So, or the replication cycle or things like that. So you have to do the same thing with your own patterns and cycles. You have to pick points where you can interrupt those patterns or break the patterns. Then, of course, part of what you have to do is you have to create a new pattern or you have to revise the pattern. Now, in my opinion, or in my experience, I should say, it's a lot easier to break one pattern and create a new pattern at the same time. You can recreate some of the steps, the ones that work, things like that, but you can also just kind of start from scratch. But once you do that, once you interrupt the pattern and you create a new pattern, then you start building and you build a new pattern in ways that avoid the pitfalls and errors and mistakes and omissions from the old pattern, right? So you use the broken pattern to re-engineer the new pattern and build it in a way that it's not susceptible, at least to those things, right? Then after that, you have to find ways of perpetuating that new pattern. And the easiest way of doing that is called practice, right? Repetition, rehearsal. So all those things, repeating something, duplicating it over and over again until it's automatic, right? So if you're brushing your teeth the wrong way, once you break the pattern of doing it the wrong way, you create a new pattern for doing it the right way, then you have to practice that new pattern over and over, or what's going to happen? The old pattern is going to return, right? It's going to resurface. So those are some of the things that you want to do when you're stuck, right? Let me also just share briefly, and then I'll wrap up, some other concepts. Once you recognize a pattern, you're aware of it, and you've identified it, and you've identified each step in that pattern, and you've just made a decision to interrupt it. There's several different strategies that you can interrupt that pattern, right? And if you schedule an appointment in my office, we'll go through some of those and we'll find several different ones so we can break the pattern that's going on in your life that's leading to upset and frustration and stagnation and stuck states and things like that. And then we'll build new patterns using a variety of strategies. But let me just kind of go through some of the basic ways that you can rebuild after you've broken a pattern. Number one, you can use the binary approach. And what I call that the black and white approach. That just means that you take everything that's in the basket and you break it into two categories: things you want to keep and things that you don't want to keep, right? Or things that you could live without and things that you can't live without, right? That's the same strategy that you use when you're house cleaning or when you're reorganizing your wallet or reorganizing your purse, right? There's some stuff you don't need, right? And so it's a lot easier to start making priorities and reorganizing if the stuff that doesn't need to be there at all disappears, right? So that's the binary approach where you just throw everything into two categories, everything that's a part of the pattern, the stuff that you want to keep and the stuff that you don't need to keep, right? Number two is what I called the break approach, right? Or the breakout approach. The breakout approach is where you basically disrupt the system, right? And in that case, you have to come up with a new system, right? You come up with a novel, creative system, you can use or look at one that somebody else has created, but basically you're breaking out of your old state or your old pattern or your old cycle by adopting something new that's disruptive, right? Completely disruptive. And I could expound about that, but move on to the next one. The next approach that you can use when you're trying to get out of a stuck state or stagnation or whatever it may be is what I call the missing piece approach, right? And basically, what the missing piece approach is, your pattern, even if it has several places where it's broken, has something that, if it were there, would address those broken pieces, right? And so it's a missing piece. It's something you haven't included, right? An example of that is if you tried a million things in terms of weight loss or managing your weight or dieting or feeling better, or overall health, things like that. Maybe the missing piece is your water consumption, right? It could be. So that's another really quick approach that's going to help you get out of a stuck state and create a new pattern that works for you. Another one, and there are just two left. The next one is the inverse approach. The inverse approach is a really obvious approach. I also call it the mirror approach, right? The inverse approach just means that for a short amount of time or temporarily, you're going to assume that you're doing things in the opposite way that they should be done, right? You're adding more salt to the recipe when it really needs less salt. You're adding more sugar to the sweet tea when it really needs less sugar, things like that, right? So you just use an inverse approach, right? And that's basically where whatever you're doing, you reverse it in the opposite direction or you do the inverse of it, right? So if you're managing every single calorie that you consume every day and it's just not working for it, another approach, since you may not have a lot to lose anyway, is to do the opposite. Stop managing, at least for a short amount of time, your calories at all, right? And start from scratch. That helps you start over. So that's another thing. If you're not getting anywhere in forward gear, maybe you should try putting it in reverse, right? And that's another strategy that a lot of people use that helps them to at least get out of a stuck state. And then the last one I'll mention, and I may expand upon some of these in a future episode, is what I call the R&R approach. The R&R could mean rest and reboot, rest and restart, where you take a break and step back and let your brain rest. That's definitely another one. So you could use R&R for rest and relaxation, or relax and reboot, or restart and reboot, that kind of thing. But when I say R&R, I'm talking about a different R&R, and I call that reprioritize and rearrange. And that's when you look at the steps within a cycle, whether even if it's successful, and see if you can reprioritize and rearrange things that make sense, right? If you're writing a paper or you're working on a project or you're trying to achieve some kind of goal, maybe the first step you're using is not the best first step, right? So when you recognize or become aware of a pattern or a cycle that's broken in your life, and you look at the steps that are making up that pattern, that gives you a lot of information. And that lets you know that, hey, I can rearrange some things, right? That's commonly done in kitchens, right? When you're making something, whether you're making iced tea or whether you're making a pie, or you're making, let's see, a pot pie, a beef pot pie, or lasagna or something like that. You can always reprioritize and rearrange steps to make it easier, right? You can also do some steps simultaneously, although you want to be really, really careful about that, because if you do that, sometimes you might lose track of one thing, and next thing you know, you've got something that's burnt on your stove that was central to your recipe, and it's like you got to regroup and figure out what you're going to do. But if you take a look at the individual items or parts of a cycle or a pattern, there are usually some things that you can do to reprioritize and rearrange those steps so that they're a lot easier to do, right? And there's a million examples of that. So with that, I'm going to wrap up today's session, today's episode. But it's really, really important, if you feel stuck in life, if your career feels stuck, if your I don't know, relationships feel stuck. If you feel stuck in terms of your goal and your goals and your purpose in life and things like that, you don't have to live being stuck. You can become unstuck. You don't have to stagnate, right? And there are a lot of different tools that you can use to do that. I just shared some of them, but there are also some really easy things that you can do too to change a stuck state. One of my top ones is music. So I use music to change my state, and I usually do it seasonally. So with that, I'm going to wrap up today. I'm so glad to do an episode with you again today. As always, if you have a holistic or other mental health and wellness problem or challenge or a life challenge or any kind of life problem that you want to address, go to our website, www.ahmhw.com, and request an appointment. You can also check out the free articles that are there on a bunch of topics, from rebooting to developing your purpose or discovering your purpose and all of those kind of things. And then also you can obviously call our office and request or schedule an appointment. But that's www.ahmhw.com. Atlanta Holistic Mental Health and Wellness, Atlanta's top holistic mental health and wellness practice. And with that, I will see you on the next episode. You take care. Bye-bye.